So I'm going to do a response video to a video that Jared Eastley made called Seven Women in End Times Prophecy. And I tend to watch everything that Jared makes. I think to date I have watched everything that I've seen posted. I subscribe to his channel. Um, Sometimes it takes me a while to catch up, but I try to do it anyway. So the rule is if he makes it, I click it. And that'll continue as long as I find that worthwhile. Um, anyway, so I clicked on that. I just want to give that preamble because I know some of you, well, many people assume many things about me. And one of those assumptions I can guess is that I'm going to click on anything that I think is about polygamy, which is hilarious to me that people think that. Maybe I'll get into why that's so hilarious, at least a piece of it. I happen to agree with every single thing that Jared said, with the exception of maybe one thing, which hopefully um, you'll see is just a little add-on more than anything else. But I said, oh, geez, let's see what he's doing now when I saw the title, because Jared, um, Jared likes kicking hornet nests, and I've been stung enough in my life that, I don't not kick hornet nests, but I try to do so a little more tactfully these days. Funny story about that. In my typical first principles, think outside the box um, strategy in life, I had a shed once that I wanted to move. To move it, I had to remove these planks that were all around it. I didn't set it up that way. I inherited that. And it was full of yellow jacket nests. And so I was trying to think of what to do because, the typical thing with that is you just dump gasoline on it and light it and run away. But I couldn't do that without incinerating the shed. And so I got a really long extension cord and set up my shop vac and turned it on with the hose right by where the bees were. They're not bees, but yellow jackets. And I just started throwing rocks at the spot, and kept doing this until the population had dwindled enough that I could just whack it with the hose of the shop vac and just suck them up as they came out. Um, so I don't know what the equivalent of that is in discussing prickly topics, but maybe we can figure it out. On that note, I do want to highly recommend a video I made October 8th, 2022. It only has 132 views, which is ironic, as of today. It's called Brief Thoughts on Reason and Argument. And it's a quick 12-minute video. I really recommend you watch it. If you've seen it before, I highly recommend you watch it again. It's a really brief treatment of how to decompose your beliefs into premises and conclusions. And the point of it is that when well, I don't think we realize just how extensively we keep our beliefs in conclusion mode. We share them with others in conclusion mode. We evaluate new pieces of information pertaining to it in conclusion mode. And you have to switch back to the premise mode, where you're considering each premise, asking whether you've got the full set, adding any that you're missing, tweaking any that are a little off or where your understanding has changed over time, and then reevaluating the mapping from cause to effect, from premises to conclusion. And what you'll find is that this skill, it's not some, I don't know what a good word for this is. It's not some esoteric, strange thing that only highly academic or scientific people need to do. It's something that all people need to figure out. And the more valuable the truth, the more important it is to be able to do this. And it applies all over life. I mean, it could apply to what floor you install in your kitchen or how you mop it. And the universality of this process, we just need to get so much better at than we are. We are as it says in the New Testament. We're like ships on the sea without rudder, and we are just swept up by so many stupid ideas. I tell you, I don't have any spoons here, but I keep seeing these dumb YouTube ads where it's like, vision is not actually based on what your eyes do. And it's some annoying, very strange thing. And then a claim, which you can imagine the exact kind of person this appeals to, a claim that some huge problem actually has some ultra simple solution, and all you need to do is give some person a little bit of money, and then you'll be cured of this thing that plagues you. And I'm so sick of this. These companies should absolutely not exist. But there's no shortage of morons in this world. And in our nation in particular, maybe in US and Canada together, the US and Canada, most people in Mexico don't have enough money to be subject to this problem, but we have so much prosperity beyond the wisdom we have to use it well. It's unmerited prosperity. In fact, just the other day, I wrote myself a little note. What did it say? Let's see. It's right here. Our safety and prosperity are not a result of merit. Our safety is a result of God mercifully holding back what would otherwise be a flood of actions from groups and individuals, each of which have the potential, this is just a rough thing that I wrote while walking through the kitchen or something, and emailed it to myself, each of which have the potential of wreaking great havoc with relatively minor acts. Our prosperity is a result of the residual effects of people much more virtuous than those surfeiting the fruits of their sacrifices. Both will end in ways that will seem gradual and in ways that will seem sudden. So surfeit is a really important word to understand if you're going to get what you should out of the scriptures. It means to gorge yourself. But there's a component of it that's unearned. So it's not just to sort of pig out at a buffet. It's like breaking into the buffet and pigging out. So, at least in my mind, that's... Anyway. We are given weapons with which to hurt ourselves. Those weapons are necessary for certain people, and they will become useful for many more people as they receive the tools to use them well. But somebody's got to be the first person to learn how to use a chainsaw. And there might be some legs that get cut off accidentally in the process. Anyway, speaking of cutting off legs accidentally, let's talk about polygamy. One of the best ways to address the situation on which people are being absurd is to match their absurdity. There are some nice scriptures for that. But to do so in a way that reveals it to be so, not in a way where you're acting like you have a weight of confidence far beyond justification, or that you're exercising due diligence when you're not. So that's one reason I'm referring to this presentation I did, Brief Thoughts on Reason and Argument, because in that presentation you'll see, and I'm only familiar with this because the Lord told me to rewatch it yesterday because I needed to add some things to something I was writing about evaluating beliefs for an upcoming book. But there's a portion of that presentation that talks about what I call the kitchen sink approach. When someone gives the pretense of having studied out and thought through something, and sometimes they have, and also being open to being wrong about any of their premises, which they're almost never when they use the kitchen sink approach. And so someone will vomit out like every reason in the world that might even slightly support their position. And they're not doing so in a way to say, here's my carefully crafted, when the messengers came to visit Abraham, he went through this very deliberate presentation of the fruits of the stewardship that God had given him. He said, look what I've done with what the Lord's given me, whether God was there or not. It actually doesn't matter. At least his servants were there. There were three individuals. So he brings out his best cheese, and he brings out these cakes that his wife had made, and he brings out he had a young man slaughter an animal, and he cooks it up for these people, and he lays it out. He wasn't just being hospitable. This was a stewardship report. He's saying, look what I've done with what the Lord has given me. And that's what we should be doing when we share our ideas, is to say, not defensively of like, this is a battle and I'm right and you're wrong. If you can't honestly go into a discussion, any discussion, doesn't matter how right you think you are, sincerely believing that that person might be more correct than you on something, if not everything. If you're not truly two-way, you should not open your mouth. There are a lot of scriptures about that too. That's what it requires to teach with the Spirit. This is why you don't teach with power and authority, because you're not willing to be wrong. So some of us, we've spent our lives willing to be so wrong that the Lord's constantly smacking us around in the other direction. And that's what it feels like, because we're so used to being wrong on everything that the Lord's like, will you stop? This is right. And he flashes like a bajillion reasons and says, look, how much do I have to slap you around until you get it? And it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll go with this, but everything I believe is incorrect or incomplete. And he's like, yeah, okay, but will you just go with this? Okay, fine. But that's so foreign for so many people because they're in the opposite camp. Almost all people are. Of, well, I know a little bit about a little bit, therefore I know everything there is to know about everything. Of course, they'd never say that, but that's the way they act. And that's what matters, not what you say you believe, but what you actually believe, that you demonstrate through your actions. So, that ought to be a universal understanding, because not only is it scattered through the scriptures, I mean, it's in popular movies. That's a line from the Batman trilogy, where the girlfriend, well, I guess he wishes she was his girlfriend, says it's not about, oh, I'm going to butcher the line, something like, it's not about who we think we are, it's what we actually do that counts. And it's spot on. So it doesn't matter if it's Christian Bale's scratchy, weird Batman voice or in the scriptures. That's a weird version of by my servants or by me, it's the same. Anyway, okay, so to this video. The specific thing I want to address is something I hear from time to time, which is I don't understand why relationships have to be sexual, because all the arguments I hear for polygamy, I don't understand why all those things can't happen, the beneficial things, supposed beneficial things, why do they have to happen in a marriage? And so their minds, so I don't remember the statistic, but like something like 96% of street fights end on the ground. And that's a wonderful argument to learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it's the art of ground fighting. For whatever reason, like 99 point a bunch of 9% of the arguments about polygamy, they always go to the ground if the ground is talking about sex. This is ridiculous for many reasons. Now, let's talk about why it's justified first. It happens to be the case that some high percentage of publicized polygamy is in fact about 99.99999% about sex. And that sort of exposes the first question. If you think you know something about this, I would first ask, what's your source? Well, every single example I've ever seen about polygamy, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, what are you looking at? Like Mormon stories? What resource have you access to learn about this from people who do it, other than where you would only ever see disgruntled reports? You'd only ever hear about when it went bad. Uh, this would be this would be like judging the safety of a vaccine by looking at VAERS only, which is the database of when things go wrong. So if that was your only resource and you said, well, all vaccines are always bad, well, of course that's the conclusion you're going to come to. That's the only evidence you're looking at. Now, you may, in fact, come to the same conclusion about one specific or all vaccines if you have access to all the data. If you interviewed a random sample of a whole lot of people who got whatever you were looking into, that vaccine, and you compiled all the pros and all the cons, that's what it would take to actually have informed consent or denial, whatever you're doing, whatever your conclusion is, an informed conclusion. You'd have to get the full picture. So suppose that there are people who live in polygamy who actually value it. Not just the guys, women too, and children, who would say, yeah, I don't know that children would have something to compare against. So let's just talk about the men and the women, the adults. And they're like, yeah, this is definitely the best thing for me. Now we're already splitting things, because another way that this argument is always taken down to the mat is by saying what we're discussing here can only be practiced in a form that it was by the early Latter-day Saints, meaning, or the present FLDS or whoever, meaning you have to do this. It's the only way to go to heaven. That is not the only practice of polygamy, folks. And nothing I'm saying here, by the way, nothing I'm saying here is an argument that anyone should do it. That's another way it goes to the mat. To assume that anyone talking about this actually cares about polygamy itself. The fact is that there's so much wrapped into this conversation that has nothing to do with it, that is so much more important than anything inside of it. Like the fact that it's a wonderful demonstration of how much a person actually trusts God or not. There's a hornet's nest for you. So let's turn on the shop vac. There are so many people in this world who claim to believe in God, but absolutely, positively have to have a list of things he would never, ever ask them to do. Polygamy is not the only thing on the list. Different people have different lists. Most Christians, for example, if you ask them, is the book of Job real? They'd say, no, it's just a story. It's a made-up representation of the extremities of suffering so that we can learn things from it. All right, is the story about Jesus made up? Surprising number of Christians will say yes to that too, or they'll say it's not literal or whatever. But the scriptures are very clear. He suffered more than a man can suffer without dying. And so that level of suffering is in fact possible. And you say, well, but he didn't die and we would die. Yes. Yes. But Job wasn't the son of God. So is it possible for man to suffer as much as Job? And you'd say, well, only if he was real. He was real. He was real. Now the question becomes, would God ever put me through that? And I promise you that there are situations where God can put you through even worse than that. And you don't have to be special in any way except that you actually trust him. Because remember what the precedent for the story of Job was? He was very, very righteous. He was faithful in everything God had given him. God bragged about him to Satan. And Satan asked him, yeah, well, of course he loves you. Look at all the things you've done for him. Take it away and see what he does. See if he loves you when you hurt him. And there's purpose. And I won't get into all that, but today. The point is, it's real, and it's on a whole lot of people's lists of things God would never do to you. There are probably a whole lot of people who've lost a child who were thinking before that happened, God would never do this to me. There are a whole lot of people who've lost a spouse. There are a whole lot of people who've suffered cancer who thought God would never do this to me. And there are a lot of people to whom God has shown the value of certain instructions that they never, ever would have desired or imagined him pointing them toward. So do you think that Abraham imagined that God would tell him to kill Isaac? I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that happening, where he expected that to happen, and he was clicking his heels in joy when it did. Of course, that wasn't the case. And we could go on and on. The Savior himself, the pinnacle of every example, the pinnacle example of every idea. He cried in Gethsemane. He cried for the Father to take away the cup. So we don't always expect everything that God is going to send our way. But so many people have so many limits. I mean, for crying out loud, look at how much of Christianity would never accept anything as scripture that's not already in the Bible. They don't accept most of what's in the Bible. Right? So how is this any different? And in saying all of that, we don't even have to go into arguing, is this a universal commandment that all people have to follow, or else is this, which it's not, by the way, is this something that's absolutely required for the best parts of heaven? Is this, is this that? We don't even have to go into all that. The question is simply, or even talk about if God has ever commanded it before, whatever. You people are so locked into what God commands. There's 2 commandments. There are only 2. Everything else is just a noisy estimate of a chunk of it to help us wrap our thick skulls around a very simple idea that's really hard to explain. And that idea is love. The 2 commandments are love God and love your neighbor. Don't force everything into your old view of like an ice cube tray of commandments. And this is it. Is the ice cube in the tray or not? My tray can only hold so much. Forget all that. It's about love. And love means what you're willing to suffer for the benefit of another. Loving God is what are you willing to suffer for God's benefit, which is an interesting idea. He's made very clear what gives him joy. It's our benefit, which brings us to commandment number 2. What are you willing to suffer for the benefit of everyone else? Or specific people, but towards everyone else. And that's it. How much you love someone is how much you're willing to suffer for their benefit. So, that doesn't even answer the question, because now you need to know how to calculate benefit, which means you have to understand reality. Now you need to know what it means to suffer. And if you want to hack the whole equation, if you end up finding your greatest meaning and joy in the benefit of others, you can't suffer. Not really. Not in a way that's not overcome by meaning. And now we've unlocked the whole puzzle. But anyway, so you're so locked into this idea of what did God command in the past? Could he command it again? Look, who cares? Here's the question. Forget polygamy. Leave it as a blank space in the question. Do you believe that anything God would ask you to do you believe that he would have sufficient reasons to ask you to do it? Sufficient reasons to believe it was for your greatest benefit and the greatest benefit of the world, because that's all he ever does, is invites people to do those things. Greatest benefit to you and the world. And if you answer no, if you think that he might command you to do something, using that word, or might invite you to do something, and not have reasons to believe it's the greatest thing you could ever do, then you worship a different God than I do. But maybe you're with me so far. So then the subsequent question becomes, do you think he's able to explain sufficient reasons to you? And if you answer no, for anything he might instruct you on, then you don't worship the God I do. Because the God I worship, he says he'll never command you to do what he doesn't have sufficient reasons, what he can't give you sufficient reasons to believe. God will never command you to do what he will not give you sufficient reason to believe. Now, many times, those sufficient reasons are specific to the commandment. But some things are so hard for us to understand because we're so far afield in our fallen limits, in our minds and hearts, that he has to be the reason. And this is an extraordinarily important principle because it cascades down through the kingdom. On the most basic level, as a parent, are there things that you ask your very young children to do that they absolutely cannot understand the reasons for? Yet, there are. There are. So the two questions are, why should they listen to you, and when will they know? Let's start with the last one. Jesus said in John 7:17, the catch all is if you do it, you will know. But, and this is the thing that all the anti-polygamists need to understand, he will never ask you to do anything he does not give you sufficient reason to believe. He's right. You might not accept the reasons he gives, but they are sufficient. And we'll talk about that in a second, because that's where humans come in, among other places. Hopefully I remember that. The other thing, the first thing is, I'm already forgetting that. So he'll never command you to do something he hasn't given you sufficient reasons to believe you should do. Oh yeah, but the catch-all is if you do it, you'll know. But why should a kid believe you in the first place? What are those sufficient reasons to try it in the first place? Whatever we're talking about, like don't touch the wood stove when it's hot, or don't eat 50 cookies. You're like, but cookies taste so good. Why wouldn't I eat 50 cookies? Right? Some people might still feel that way. But it's good I crack myself up because I don't crack anyone else up. And that just makes it funnier to me. So why does a child believe a parent? If you're answering because they're your parent and you should, then you're a huge fan of something called unrighteous dominion. You say, well, the commandment says honor your father and mother. You should look up what that word means. I'll give you a hint. One use of it is honor widows. Another, which is another hornet's nest to kick, is honor the elders. And in both cases, it's talking about money. With the widows and the elders, it's talking about money to support them financially. Is that the only meaning of honor thy father and thy mother? I'm not claiming that. I'm just saying there's more to the picture than just blindly follow whatever your parents tell you. That's not a commandment. That is not a commandment. So why should you believe your parents. Well, some of us shouldn't believe our parents. Some of us should seriously doubt anything our parents say because they're abysmal failures at life. And we should still honor them because they made such sacrifices for us as kids, even if they were abysmal parents. You know, every single mother risks her life to have a baby. The dads, it's kind of a harder argument to make, but especially if they weren't around. But there it is, parents plural. So you should honor, I'm sorry, slip back into it. You should implicitly believe your parents so far as they've given you reason to. So I worked for my grandfather in construction over the summers growing up. That man knew everything there was to know about construction, at least beyond the limits of anything I could detect. If he had an opinion on something that's construction related, that's what I did. And I did it until I could find the limits of it, which I don't think I ever did. I can't remember a time. There may have been some time, but I don't remember a time where I came up with a better way of doing it. It's funny because at the beginning, I really thought I could come up with better ways, and I tried to take shortcuts. And now the penance of that is my kids try to do shortcuts on me. But I try to teach them the same thing my grandfather taught me. He took me aside, and he said, I was painting all these boards that were going to go way up tall on a roof. No one was going to see any level of details. It was 3 stories above the ground. And he's under a roof. And I was painting all these boards, and he was off doing other things. He came back, and I said, I'm all done. He said, what do you mean you're all done? Because he knew how long it was going to take, and I did it faster. He said, let's take a look. So he stopped what he was doing, which I'm sure was super annoying. He came and looked at the boards. He said, how did you paint these? Show me. And I showed him, and he said, that is not how I showed you to do it. I said, yeah, but this is faster. And he said, look, I've been doing this a long time. Doesn't mean I know the best way to do this. But it's probable that I know the best way to do this. I want you to do it, this whole job, the way I told you to do it. And then after this job, if you find a new way that you think is better, go with it. But then you're going to know the standard that you have to be better than. And I'm sure those weren't the words he used, but that was the idea he conveyed. And he made me paint every single one of those dang boards again. And it took forever. I will not forget that. And so even if I didn't believe him, I sure as heck wasn't going to take the shortcuts because I didn't want to have to keep doing this terrible job over and over again. So it's like that. You should believe your parents if they give you sufficient reason to believe them through the amalgamation of your past experiences with them. So if someone's super successful financially, now we're branching beyond parents, it doesn't mean that their advice will make you super successful financially. It could be that the cause to that effect is different than what it seems. But it is a reasonable assumption to believe that they knew enough about what they were doing to take the risk to start walking down that path. John 7:17. That's what my grandfather told me. Without quoting scripture, he taught me John 7:17. So, what about when the risks are enormous? Then you need stronger reasons. See, it has to adjust. Let's say instead of painting boards, my grandfather was like, look, if you cut off your left leg, you'll have enough money to never have to work again. And I'd be like, well, geez, give me the knife, right? Well, like, that's a pretty strong claim. You better have some great reasons to believe that before you try it. And that's okay. That's still faith. You only verge into unbelief when you're not willing to do what is justified by the evidence you know. Or you stick in your ways even when the evidence contradicts or should cause you to doubt what you think you know. And all of these are super relevant for this topic. And they are the point, because everything I just said, if you can't figure this out with polygamy, guaranteed you have massive problems in life that you can't see yet. They're in normal life, but you know, things aren't blowing up in your face in ways that you can see. Your life might look like a slow motion train wreck to someone with greater wisdom, but to you it's all hunky-dory. You can't see that the tracks are out 5 miles away, but they are. They are. If you have problems with this, you definitely have issues with that. And I don't mean problems as in your position, your conclusion is that this is always bad, or God can never command such a thing, or whatever. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I don't mean you think this is always bad. If you think this is always bad, hey, whatever. The the problem is if you think that there's a list of stuff somewhere that God could never tell you to do. That's the problem. That's the problem. If you're in a position where you can't analyze premises and the mapping to conclusions and revisit this after you've already decided, that's a problem. And I'm telling you, if you're in this position, it's like an octopus stretching over your life. So the objective of talking about this, it has nothing to do with persuading people for or against polygamy. It's just a useful thing with a certain group of people who tend to be LDS, or used to be. And frankly, it's a huge problem with Christians too. If we were talking to a bunch of Muslims, they'd be like, I'm all for this. In fact, I'd go even farther than anything you're saying. And they'd go into things that I would disagree with them on with this, that mostly have to do with age of a wife, or age of a female when she should get married. Those are things that I would strongly disagree with them on. Anyway, or the how the ladies should be treated. That's something I strongly disagree with them on. But they'd be all for this. So it just depends on the traditions of the people you're talking to. Okay, sorry, that was what I wanted to get to with this, which we haven't touched yet, is why does this need to actually be marriage? And this is the part that I would push a little further than Jared did in his video, which if you haven't watched it, I recommend you do. You can find him, Jared Eastley is his name. Well, he makes comments on his channel, so you can click on his name and get to his channel that way in the video 7 Women and End Times Prophecy. Okay, here we go. Here's a question for you. We're going to go to a place that you've never been before in all likelihood, especially if you're a lady, or if you're a beta male, which that's probably most of the people who are going to be watching this. So, not that those are most of the people who watch this channel, but, controversial topics tend to be spread. And this actually reinforces the point I made about if your only resources on polygamy are people who hate it, well, of course you're going to have a negative view of it. The people who don't have a problem with it aren't making YouTube videos. Because for one, if they're practicing polygamy, it's illegal, I think, everywhere, right? So they're not going to be like, hey, let me make a YouTube video that publicizes how I'm breaking the law. Especially if it's on one of these laws that you're not allowed to break these days, because it seems like there's an awful lot that are celebrated when you break them. Anyway, and they're going to be private. Their goal in life is not to convert people to their point of view. They just want to live their lives. And so if you meet some of these people, I'm telling you, there are people, and some of these people are women, who are all for polygamy in their case. In their case. I have not met any ladies that I know of. Somebody can maybe correct me here if they're like, hey, you know me and I'm one of these ladies. But I don't think I know any ladies who try to push this on other people. I've met guys who do, who believe that everyone has to do this to be in heaven or whatever. But I don't think that I have continuing contact with those people. I've just met them in the past. So anyway, it's the militant people are on the other side. The ones who want everyone to agree with them are the anti-polygamists. The pro-polygamists are just doing their thing in private for the most part. So anyway, back to the point here. So let me ask you this question. Sorry. So to connect that to where we came from, what you'll see for the most part, and I think our channel has become kind of an exception to this, at least in comments, which is great. Most of the trolls have been vanquished, I guess. But for the most part, what you'll find, and every teacher knows this is true, every professor, anyone that gets teacher evaluations, people are so much more willing to complain about something than to compliment something. They're so much more willing to complain about something than to compliment it. You look on book reviews. Book reviews are almost always massively skewed to the negative. It's not because most people hate most books that they choose to read. I'm sure that is true because there's a proliferation of books. But if you go out and you read a book because you believe it might be good, there's not this huge probability that you're going to hate it. But that's the way the reviews go. Why? Because we're so much it's part of fallen human nature. The natural man is so much more willing to complain about something, to fight against something, than to fight for something. Everyone's a coward when it comes to fighting for good. Everyone's the most courageous person in the world when it comes to fighting against it. Why is that? And it reminds me of what Jesus said when he said to the Pharisees, the prostitutes are going to go to heaven before you. And before doesn't just mean chronologically, it also is a question of above in that usage in the Greek. And I'm sure that really ticked them off even more. But the reason is because they actually repented based on what Jesus taught. They actually improved in their lives. The Pharisees got worse because of what Jesus taught. So if you really believe what you say you believe, you better fight for it and not just fight against all the stuff that disagrees with it. Those aren't the same. Those aren't the same. We talked about Muslims. There are many Muslims who will give their lives for their faith in a heartbeat. And even though what they believe might be incomplete or incorrect, their dedication to it means something to God. That's going to make people's heads spin. We should be more like Muslims in their level of dedication. Absolutely. Christians should be more like Muslims in their degree of dedication, in their honor for families, the importance of families. That doesn't mean to take that whole bucket of whatever, ball of wax, bucket of whatever, but in those ways, yeah, we should be more like that. Because, leftist extremists are willing to just go all out into what they believe, just all for it, make the purpose of their whole life to fight for what they believe. Christians just sit at home. They'll barely go to church. They won't even read the scriptures. Which of those two do you think God honors? If it's a question for you, go read about the two sons. And the one said he was going to do his father's will and didn't. The other said he wasn't and did. And then you'll understand more about that. All right, so here's a question for you. How many women do you know who are known by anyone but their husband? This is a very fun thing to think about, to unpack, because we're going to hit a lot of ideas that you've never thought about before, and you probably don't want to know. So one thing, I just used the word to know, the verb to know. Biblically, that is treated as a euphemism for sex. Except it's not a euphemism for sex. It's a transcendent idea for which one application is sex. Do you think when Jesus said to know thee and thy son is eternal life, when he's praying to the Father, do you think he meant have sex? To have sex with Jesus and his Father is to have eternal life? Of course not. Did he mean something different? No. He meant something transcendent. Something more than that. Something more than that. Just like eating a snack is different than feasting. Eating a cracker is different than a Thanksgiving dinner. But they're both eating. It's like knowing in that in that sense of the word, the Greek word, to know. So, who knows a woman? Who knows a woman? Does anyone know that lady except her husband? So let's go through possibilities. What about her close friends? What about random people she interacts with on the street? Of course they don't know her, and the same would be true of a man. You don't know a man or a woman by just walking by them on the street. What if you have a short conversation with a man or a woman? You don't know them. What if you read a letter from a man or a woman? You don't know them. What if you work with a man or a woman? Well, now you might start to argue, well, I've known this guy for 20 years. I know him. We've worked together for 20 years. I know who this guy is. With a guy, maybe you do. With a man, maybe you do. Do you know a woman you've worked with for 20 years? You do not. Why? And this is where the differences begin. What about if she's your sister or your mom? This is where the differences begin. Okay? So the difference between a coworker and a family member, whether it's a sibling, mother, whatever, or wife, the difference is she's still wearing her mask at work. That is true on so many levels. Another euphemism we talk about is exposing their nakedness. Exposing their nakedness. It's not just literally talking about taking clothes off. You know, God talks about, I'm going to raise your skirts up to your shoulders or whatever. In terms of humiliating people, it's to expose the things about them that you wouldn't want other people to see. Who does get to see it? Your husband. Your husband gets to see it in a literal way, but in a much more important figurative way. Let me flip the question around. Instead of asking who knows a woman, let me ask it in a more brutal way that's also more direct, more clear. What person in a woman's life sees the worst parts of her? Because that can only be one person in that hierarchy, right? Who sees the worst parts of her. Only her husband. Only her husband. Why is this a novel thought that you have never considered? Why have you never heard this from anyone? Because that's how deep the lies go. Not lies about women, lies about everything. The lie, the big lie. You see, we have all these overly complicated discussions about things that are probably actually a lot simpler than they need to be. And the reverse is also true. But in the former case, the reason many times for it is we have to weave through so many lies that directly contradict what's so freaking obvious to basically anyone. But we've been coded to not see it. It's like the monkey thing, to not see it, to not hear it, to not speak of it, to pretend it's not there, to say, instead of saying the emperor has no clothes, we're not allowed to say the emperor does have clothes. We have to deny reality or else suffer the consequences. You're not allowed to say things. There's a whole list of things you're not allowed to say. And one of them is a husband sees the worst parts of his wife. And that is not a sexual comment at all in terms of, genitalia and the act. In terms of gender, sex, it is a comment because a wife might not see the worst part of her husband. For most men, it's probably the people that betray him that see his worst part. So it's whatever's going to trigger his basest human nature, masculine human nature. That husband's the one that's going to bear her feminine human nature, which in both cases, human nature is not the good part. It's the fallen part. All right. So now we're getting somewhere. So now please tell me, suppose there was a person with tremendous amounts of light. Doesn't need to be a man or a woman. Doesn't need to be someone you know or you don't. Let's say that some mighty angel pops down from heaven. Boop. That's the sound it makes. Just kidding. And that angel's job, whether it's a man or woman, doesn't matter. That angel's job is to help this woman improve. That angel would have to see all the nasty bits about her, wouldn't he? And women are really, really, really good at, I'm going to try to say this in a neutral way because it's not a bad thing, at withholding who they really are from the public. That's a positive feminine quality, but it has some negative effects. So women aren't meant to be promiscuous in any way, not just sexually. We're not just talking about sexual things. Again, it's subordinate. The sexual thing is just a piece of the transcendent. It's not the whole thing. It's just it's like an LED screen on a giant computer. It's just the part that everyone sees all the time and is more familiar with. But there's a whole bunch of stuff inside of there that's all like that too. It's just the easier to see part. So women are not meant to be promiscuous. So that angel would have to have all kinds of revelation to be able to see this woman for who she really is. All right? So what's the problem? Can't angels do that? Yes, they can. They can, according to whatever level of light, but you have access to the higher parts of the kingdom there, and you could send an angel, a mighty angel. We know those exist. The descriptor mighty is used with angel in the scriptures, so there's a such thing as mighty angels. Okay, mighty angels can do mighty things. All right, so mighty angel comes down, doesn't matter if it's a man or woman, and he or she can help this woman see the parts of her that she's probably not just good at masking from other people, but from herself. But even if there's not some level of hiddenness there, there's also the question of perspective of that angel saying, I'm going to bring down to you this better way that you didn't know before and teach you about it so that you can ascend higher. Great, what's the problem? All the ladies in the room say, yeah, let's get angels coming down. It's ladies' night, right? And they're gonna help us all ascend. Great, what's the problem? Here's the problem. Angels operate under rules that they do not have the authority to break. And one of those rules is a degree of justice that humans are not limited to. There are certain rights and privileges here, and this is backwards from the way most people think it works. You can do things here that you can't do there. Once you're not mortal anymore, there are things you cannot do. That's why Jesus had to come here, because he couldn't do what he did as something other than a mortal man. And it's not just true for him. And you can make a very sound argument about this from the scriptures. If we had time, we could do it. But let's just suppose that's the case for now. I'm not asking you to believe me, but let's just freeze that variable and solve the rest of the equation. So here's one of the rules that happens. Who do angels come to? Do they come to, shenanigan queens or crazy people doing crazy things? No. A sound mind in every form of godliness. A sound mind in every form of godliness. Someone who perceives, receives, values, and lives all of the instructions about godliness that they've been shown. To put it into plainer English that might ring some bells, someone who can say to God, I have been true and faithful to everything you've given me. And then an angel comes. All right, you with me so far? There's nothing female about that. That's for all humans. That's for all humans. And so continuing down the all humans track, here's something that's going to surprise you. Suppose you have that box checked, which almost no one does. So that's the first problem. Now we've cut off angels, all other things being equal, and they're not equal. There are other mechanisms to open the door to the ministry of angels. But let's suppose that's it, because that's the big one. That's the only one that doesn't involve other people. That's the one that's fully in your control. It doesn't require the sacrifice of other people. Like when Alma Sr. was praying like a maniac and his whole church for Alma Jr. You take that away, and the angel couldn't have come to Alma Jr. So, under those rules, a person who's not 100% living up to what they know can't be visited by angels. Well, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. Let's say that through the other rules that I'm not going to go into that involve the sacrifice of other people, that an angel could come. This is the shocker. Very, very, very few people would listen to what that angel has to say. That's a shocker. Because we all believe if some glowing being appeared to us and said crazy things, we'd just be on board. Well, I mean, a glowing being and whatever, of course that's going to be true. We'll go with it. It turns out that there are all kinds of more real world, normal, I shouldn't say real world, but more normal situations that perfectly predict your response to that situation, as outlandish as it seems. And I tell you, I don't have time to go through them. I tell you, on every single one, you're probably a flashing neon sign that says, I would never, ever listen to an angel. Unless that angel told me only things that I already believe. And agreed that I'm already living according to them, even if I'm not. And that's a tall order. So, the angel's not going to come. So who does that leave? Humans. Why? If the moment you reject what an angel's saying, one, he or she can't keep talking. Two, you have to be judged for that. Now with humans, if I'm telling you something you don't want to hear, you can click off this video and you can run away and hide. But you can't make me stop talking. I will speak as long as I want. Unless they put one of those Silence of the Lambs things on me, I'm just going to keep talking. Okay? Nothing anyone can do can make me stop talking. I will say whatever God tells me to say with no hesitation whatsoever. I have more power in that respect than an angel from heaven. That's a power God grants to mortals. And there are reasons for that. There are reasons for everything. Okay? What if a person is rejecting me? I can still keep talking. What if, and I can choose not to. There were times when Jesus kept quiet, and there were times when he would not shut up. And those were more numerous, by the way. What if they try to kill me? I can still keep talking. Abinadi preached while he was being burned alive. He would not stop till he was done. All right. So hopefully that's cleared up a little bit. All right, but now we're just at the human level. We still haven't made a case for why this person has to be a husband. Except we have. Because once you reduce down to the human level, humans are not going to have a full awareness of what's going on deep down inside someone unless they have power from God to see in someone's heart and mind. Now, you might say, yeah, but humans can have that. It says so in the scriptures. There are people who say, I know what you're thinking, and they're right. Again, Jesus is the prime example of this. And mercifully, he's given us other examples of people that weren't Jesus. So we can't just say, oh, that's magic Jesus power. No, it's the power of God, and it's available to men and women. So why does a woman need a husband to be the one who sees inside her heart and mind and tells her how she can improve? Because she won't believe anybody else. If you're a husband, you know that this is an issue even with you being her husband. And so you have to trot out all these evidences that are not revelatory because she may not believe that any more than she'd believe it from anyone else. Even if you have all these evidences from your life that you have a relationship with God, and sometimes things happen like this. You have to say, oh, well, last Tuesday this happened, and remember when this happened, and here's a pattern of this, and don't you think this would be better, and here's all the reasons, or whatever. So maybe that's sufficient for you to believe that it has to be a husband. And now we just get into the argument of, yes, but why can't this be a marriage, but one of abstinence? I don't know the reason, but for some reason God has put these things together. There is one thing I do know is that there is a spiritual bond that happens in the physical act, and there is some kind of melding of souls. And how much of that is the first time and how much of that is subsequent times, I don't know. I haven't like Ghostbustered up some meter to measure the paranormal on that. I have no idea. And frankly, I don't care enough to ask and to find out. I don't know why I'd need to know that. So first I'd have to find reasons to believe, to have real intent in asking. But I do know that there's a bond that exists. This is one, maybe the most important reason it's so important for people to mind who they have sex with. It's because there is a bond, a spiritual linking that happens, which nothing in this life can break. Nothing in this life can break that. It will exist until you die, at least. And that's why it's so important to pay attention to that. Again, it has nothing to do with the physical per se. There are much deeper things going on that we don't understand. And we're given instructions in the language we can understand. But that doesn't mean it's the full picture or the most important part. It's just to get us started. And John 7:17, once you have had sex with someone, you know that there's a bond. You can try to deny it, and a lot of people do. A lot of promiscuous people will do anything in the world to try to make it go away, and they can't. And deep down inside, they have a lot of issues that can only partially be addressed in this life. So maybe we've hit our quota of things people don't want to hear but are true for this video, but that is why it has to be a husband. So Jared in his video mentioned, and I agree with this, that there are situations where a man can benefit other people, even that he's not related to. How much he can benefit those people, though, is a factor of their sex. Can't use gender anymore. That one's been co-opted. But their sexual gender, just to be really specific, it's a factor of what they're born with between their legs, or the lack thereof, and it differs. The mechanism and the limits differ between them. There are things a woman can only receive from her husband. And the physical world teaches us that. There are physical things that a wife can only receive from a husband. And some would argue that the reception of them makes that man her husband. There are also spiritual things that a woman can only receive from her husband. Neither of those two things are true about the transmission of value from a man to a man. I can have a father-son relationship or a son-father relationship with any man. It doesn't matter if we're related or not. I can share with any other man everything I could share with a biological father or son. Think about that. That's crazy. Is that true between brother and sister, mother and son, father and daughter, or random strangers versus husband wife? No, it is not. That is not true. Those aren't equivalent. A father cannot give to his daughter everything a husband can give to his wife. A brother cannot give to a sister everything a husband can give to his wife. And then we could go into this for strangers. It's all the same. Do you understand now? There's only so much that can happen. And Jared's 100% right when he says that when the time comes, there will be men who have something to give beyond what can be received in their current relationships. And they will say no to prospects that come to them. They will say no. This is not theoretical. It will shock you to hear that there has been more than one case where a woman has come to me and solicited me to have them as a plural wife. I don't know how to say that in language I like. I detest this concept of taking wives. It's ridiculous. And I said, no, straight up no. There have been all sorts of bizarre things that have happened to me that I really, really prefer would never have had to happen. I really, really detest putting myself out there, believe it or not. I do not like doing this. And it's because you cast the net, and for every person that needs to hear what you say, there's going to be 99 people who are just going to make your life harder and will never benefit from what you say. And whatever the ratio is, it's probably a lot worse than that. There are most people who are inclined to consider things they don't already believe are crazy. And every single person who does something like this, in terms of some kind of ministry, they have to deal with that. I'm sure this is something that a lot of other people can commiserate with me on. The vast majority of people who are going to listen, I don't mean listen to what you say in terms of applying it, but be interested in hearing what you have to say, are straight up crazy. And not in the good way of like, here's to the crazy ones, right? I mean like people who are going to cause you harm in your life. And that's very unfortunate. But that's the cost of doing business. That's something Paul had to deal with. It's certainly something Jesus had to deal with. Then you just have to confide that marching forward, more and more truth is going to shake these people out and they'll leave you alone eventually, hopefully. So there are situations that will arise where people are going to say like, oh yeah, I totally want to be with this guy, and the guy's going to say, no, sorry, I'm not interested. And legality aside, because that's a huge issue. Like no one is encouraging anyone to break any laws here just for the sake of any three-letter agencies that might be listening in. But even if some switch flipped and that sort of thing was legal, or even if it was pursued, I guess, I'm not a lawyer, you'd have to talk to a lawyer, but the laws around marriage and bigamy and this and that, there are people who have multiple girlfriends, so I guess that's not illegal. You know, and those girlfriends could even be live-in. You get into the issue of God's view on that. That's sort of a different ball of wax that we don't have to get into here. But even if you took the legal challenges away, a man only has so much that he can give, and he has to dedicate that to the best he knows. And so if you're looking for a situation that another person could provide, the person you're soliciting is going to have to reserve the little he has to give to the best situation. That's no different than monogamy, right? If you're some lady, you're not going to go with some scrub who's got nothing to offer you if you have the opportunity to find a better man. But, you know, like the song Can't Find a Better Man, if you can't find a better man, then your choice is a worse man or being single, right? Anyway. All right. Sometimes I feel like Bumblebee from Transformers. I can only think and communicate in songs and movie references. It's shocking how much you can convey with that, though. And far from being a fault. It's actually a symbol of, um, it's a sign that indicates that you're accessing transcendent ideas because you're surpassing the limits of human language, or you're just lazy and intellectually you're just it's like cussing an awful lot. You're just using placeholders to avoid the need to actually think. All right, so I've said a dangerous amount here, and hopefully you're nice and offended, and you can use that firestorm kicking the hornet's nest to go do productive things, I guess. But thanks for the video, Jared. I think you said it really well, better than I can. And I just add this little tidbit that took me way too long to share.